Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I'm hanging out with Tali from That's Barnaby over on the TikToks. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. It's my birthday. This is a nice birthday surprise to get to hang out with, you, Dave, a longtime fan. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on, and especially thanks for coming on and sharing your birthday with us. I really appreciate that. You'd be so kind to kind of introduce yourself to people and tell people what it is that you do, and also, folks, as always, down in the description below, you can find some links to follow Tali around the interwebs.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tali. But most people know me as Barnaby on the internet. That's Barnaby. I use they them pronouns. My channel is just a lot of D&D memes, as well as a lot of deep conversations on how to be a better DM at your table around like conflict resolution and stuff like that. So I do a lot of content around like, hey, if you have a player who's being a douche, how do you like have that conversation, especially if they're a friend? How do you make sure everybody at your table is included? Just all these little like what I consider for like facilitation skills, given my background. So a lot of stuff around that, and then just like picking fights with other D&D people around like mundane conversations, as we do as nerds.
It's all part of the charm of the community. So I'm
Right.
guessing winging your metal dice at the players that are being douches is not acceptable.
It is frowned upon. I would say ask for consent, but I would personally not throw dice at a player, only as a last resort.
At that point, they're probably on their way out the door. So you actually teach kids how to DM as a living. You were saying before we
Yeah,
went live.
it's part of my job. I've managed to convince my job to let me get paid to play Dungeons and Dragons, which is the rarest of blessings. Enough paperwork and enough jargon, you can get people to let you get away with anything.
I've seen some crazy things happen. But before we get into any of those, you want to kind of tell us a little bit about what you do and what that process looks like.
Yeah, so I run a program here in my hometown through a nonprofit that I work with, where we are trying to introduce Black and Brown kids to the hobby. It's not always accessible. Books cost money, dice cost money. It's not the easiest hobby to get into. And so what we do is teaming up with our local game stores here in our county. We offer for kids to be able to come to tables and play D&D. We also play a couple other cheaper TTRPGs. So we want to support, people of color who make things in the indie market and stuff. And also games that are just like good at teaching like some of those base social skill things. And we give kids dice, we give them books, we, give them space to be able to explore being creative in the space. And the program's just built around that. We do lots of lost minds. We do lots of those sort of like beginner, like here's how you do these things, and within that we have conversations around like boundaries and consent and what's okay to do, and those skills transfer over into real life. We want the things that we practice at the table to be things that we can practice away from the table when we go on adventures in real life.
Do you find that in your particular community there is stigmas around tabletop RPGs? Do people know what they are? Are they aware of them? They have preconceived notions of what it is.
Yeah, I think one, it feels really daunting. So usually whenever there's a couple of things that usually come up, like usually like parents, because we do like a Q&A with parents, and parents are usually like, isn't this devil worship? Like, no, those days are over. I mean, there can be devil worship in D&D, but that won't be what we're running. Not in 5e. 5e doesn't have tables for that. At least none that I've found. I'm sure there's a supplement somewhere for it, but
They're usually
none of
the bad
that.
guys.
Yeah, usually the bad guys. Just walking. There's that. Then that. Oh, it's a really expensive hobby to get into, and so it's not accessible. Which is when we like point them towards some of these indie games. Like, hey, these are things you can play with your kids, and you don't have to do a bunch of math, because I think a lot of times the things like, oh, I don't want to do a lot of math, and then also just like that feeling like, isn't this a game for like, not to pick on you, Dave, but just like white dudes who have
Yeah.
beards and wear glasses, and like being like, no, like it's maybe back in the day that's maybe how it started, but like modern D&D is very different and is very diverse and has lots of different people interacting in the hobby, and we want to introduce your kids to join this big new community, or not new, but like this community that's flourishing right now, to like give room for more voices to be at our tables.
Well, anecdotally, like I'll quote Lewis Porter Jr. on, kind of on that, like, he's said, and he's got videos of him saying, if you're a person of color, the way you got into D&D was you had a white friend that played D&D, like was kind of the thing. And I think that's more, and that was probably far more true, years ago than it is now. But, because it just comes a lot of time, because back then it was just like, the way you got into playing D&D or tabletop RPGs was you had a friend that played them, because when I first started, there was no internet. So it wasn't like you were going to randomly stumble upon it on the internet or have it come across, your social media.
Yeah, it was a lot. You had to go looking for it. Now, like
Yeah.
it's with the success of things like Critical Role, Dungeons and Daddies, all these other things. It's a lot easier for people to see. I think it's that part of like being able to see people play the game, and then when you see people playing, like, oh, that looks really fun. I want to do that, and then getting into it. So I think we're having, and we also have, I feel like, more ambassadors now for the game, more people who come from different backgrounds. We have a lot of female creators. We have a lot of LGBT creators, a lot more Black and brown creators, disabled creators. People seeing themselves reflected in the hobby, I think, does a good job of like letting people know, like, oh, this is a space that I can interact with. It's a space that's for me.
Yeah, that's always been like a struggle for me, because part of why we started Nerdarchy, and one of our things is like being ambassadors of the hobby and just wanting more people to take part in the game, and join the hobby. But like, as an old white male creator, how do you bridge those gaps and reach out to other communities? So it is really good that it is diversifying and getting more people in there, and people like yourself that are adding their voice, which I really appreciate. And it's actually one of the things I really love about TikTok is the fact that it has a much broader, more diverse demographic than a lot of the other platforms. I think it's probably because it's ease of use. You just pull out your phone and you can make TikToks and throw them up there, which I think is going to be a huge spreader for the hobby. I think Jacob from XP Level 3 was telling me that he searched the D&D hashtag on TikTok and got like 1 billion hits. I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
that sounds about
crazy.
right. Like the community's so large on like
Yeah.
D&D TikTok that like it's like I definitely have like my niche and my clique of like 200 to 300 creators that I interact with, and because there's a lot of collaboration within the community. We do a lot of like storylines. We do a lot of like starting quote unquote like almost like wrestling beefs with
Yeah.
one another. Making fun of each other's content, or like being like we do a lot of lives where we like poke fun at each other and like talk about like things within the game. But then like 3 weeks from now I'll run into, there's a whole nother section that just exists that is its own like little clique of people, and it's the community is really big, but it's really great that it's really big because it's constantly finding new creators that offer new perspectives on things and new things for me to consider and or new things to bring to my table.
And also, I find like hanging out at TikTok, I'm like, here is a subgenre of D&D I never anticipated. so, so I mean, it's definitely been really cool. So, what ages are you usually find yourself working with?
I work with kids as young as 11, and as old as like 21. And I know 21 is not like a kid, but like we definitely have
Yeah,
had kids that have gone through the program that have like stuck around for a long period of time.
yeah,
And then they're just like, yeah, like I want to get into like DMing, and so like we're teaching, teaching them. And we had like a transition period, when we all went into lockdown, of like teaching like how do we run games online instead of in people. So like teaching virtual tabletops, finding ones that are accessible and easy to use with low paywalls. Like there's all these things that are like involved to like make the game accessible as humanly possible. And like how do you give those tools to like younger kids? But and yeah, so teaching 11-year-old how to use Roll 20 is an, is an interesting way to spend your afternoon. We've found a different one called Owlbear Rodeo, which has been really great, for like teaching younger kids how to use virtual tape. It's a little bit more accessible, a lot more drag and drop than plugging numbers in. But it's great. We have kids and they get it. Only thing I'm always surprised about is like how quickly kids will pick up stuff. 11-year-old will like, I'll be like, so let's talk about like storytelling and like how to write plots, and they're like, I got this, go away. And, and
Yeah.
like jump right into with like all all this unearned confidence and like knock it out of the park, or don't knock it out of the park and are completely fine with it.
I think Waz from D20 has a couple videos on Owlbear Rodeo. He'd been using that for a little bit. So my brother was working for the library, the public libraries in Philadelphia, and they had like after school programs, and he was able, like one of the things he was able to sneak into that was running D&D games for kids and stuff. Unfortunately, the pandemic killed that, but for a while he was able to get involved with that a little bit, and also con someone into paying him to play D&D, which I'm
Libraries
all
are great
for
for
that.
that. Like prior to like the explosion of the internet, I think the biggest like ambassador for D&D has always been libraries. Like it's really easy to go to a library, look at a community board, and see like somebody trying to get people to sign up to learn how to play or to run a game. So if you're in an area and you don't feel comfortable using LFG on D&D Beyond, definitely go to like your local library and look to see if there's game. Like a lot of libraries are leaning more towards like being, because libraries are community spaces, and you should definitely capitalize in using those community spaces.
Yeah, and I also feel like most schools now, it seems like, have after school programs for D&D, and gaming clubs in general has been growing a lot. There's a YouTube creator, Dungeon Coach, that does I think track and field. He's a coach for track and field at a high school. Also runs D&D programs, which are full of a bunch of his like athletes. So I was like, oh my God, I'm like totally in bizarro world right now compared to like my experience about D&D and being in high school.
Yeah, it's way different. Like, I, for me, like what D&D was then versus like what it is now. Like in my head, when I was younger, I was like, oh, it's a lot of like dungeon crawling and solving puzzles. And now, at least in the spaces I've existed in, it's cottage core dating sims. More than anything, a lot of shopping episodes, lots of beach episodes, lots of angst, lots of K drama sort of nonsense, which is fun. It's interesting to like interact, and like when those two play things like collide, where it's like we're going to dive in the dungeon, but later on we need to talk about our relationship and the direction it's going. I It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like having come through like all the editions and like seeing how the game progressed, has been really interesting and a lot of fun. Like it went from my early days where it was mostly like dungeon crawls, like you show up, the game started at the beginning, the door to the dungeon. You might do some town stuff, but you definitely weren't having shopping episodes, and it was like, I guess like that's how it was like in my tweens and teens, and then in my early 20s, the I started playing with more people that were from were college students, and a little bit younger than me, and so we started seeing like the influx of like larpers and theater kids, right? So which I think that's like where it really started to kind of like the change of the game, and making it more narrative.
Yeah, and like my only experience with the game is from like a narrative standpoint. I've been very interested and have had a chance of being part of. I don't know if you're familiar with the community on TikTok, but they refer to themselves as Bigger Talk. Bigger Talk is a community of gamers who don't play D&D, are begging you to try other games and other systems. So that's where you're powered by the apocalypse people are. You're please somebody play Corrales or Core Systems or Fate with me. You're
Yeah.
exalt, all those people are and they are advocating for a lot of those games, and giving you these different experiences. So that's my first time I got to do like a hardcore dungeon crawl, was with people that I can't remember what the system was called, but it was real crunchy. It was real real what do you call harsh? It was real harsh. Like, no, there's no
Maybe
give or
Dungeon
give.
Crawl Classics. That kind of sounds like that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's what it is. The Dungeon Crawl
Yeah.
Classics, where it was just like, "Oof, boy, we didn't last long."
Honestly, I just discovered what Beggar Talk was recently. It's been showing up on my For You page forever now. But so like TikTok is weird, right? Because I'll see like a hashtag for like a trending TV show or something. There's nothing to do with what's on my For You page. So people use a lot of weird hashtags. So when I saw Beggar Talk, I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until I think Vic had mentioned it again, and I was like, oh, that's a thing. Okay, it's actually a thing. It's not one of the nonsense hashtags. Yeah, I mean, even though we generally talk about D&D mostly, occasionally we do sneak in other videos on our channel about other games. I mean, we're about to finish up Quest RPG. On this channel, we did last night was episode 11 of 12. We've done Cypher System on the channel. Actually, today or yesterday, we threw up a video talking about the Quest RPG. So generally, like if we start playing a new game, we'll then do like a video on it, just kind of like an overview. But unfortunately too, like if you're a content creator and you want people to watch your stuff, like talking about things that aren't D&D, it's not going to happen very much. Like internally, we were talking about the Quest video the other day, and Doug was like, oof. I was like, well, I wasn't expecting much from that video, but yeah, sometimes you just got to do the videos you want to do.
Yeah, no, I'm a big ambassador for Quest. It's one of the games that we use as like an alternative to teaching kids, how to get into the hobby. Quest is great for kids. It's just the 1d20, great system, real easy to teach, especially if you're wanting people who don't play TTRPGs, like as an introduction, like do that and then like introduce them to like D&D.
Powered by Apocalypse is another really good one for new players.
Mm-hmm.
Like my wife recently started playing not that long ago, and we started with D&D, and she played that a little bit, and then we moved into Expanse, which is a bit different from D&D, and there's different things to learn. But it's like after you learn D&D, everything else is kind of downhill. Like there aren't many games you're going to play that are more complex than D&D, right? There's a few, but for the most part, like it's going to get easier, not harder.
Yeah, like I think also with the like existence of D&D Beyond, it's definitely made it easier. I played on a live stream the other day with Amelia Som. I don't know if you follow them on TikTok, but they have this one called Roguelike, where every week it's a different group of people playing the same characters trying to make it through this hardcore dungeon, like a roguelike. Which has been really fun. And like in order to play that, we have to play like old school, where like it's pen and paper, like so there's no D&D Beyond because nobody's allowed to see the character sheets. And I was like, I'm completely lost. I only know how to do this in context of like D&D Beyond, because something like whoever played before we had multi-class, and I was like, I don't know how to do multi-class like on paper. I just was like, I think like the existence of a lot of those tools have also made like D&D a lot more accessible, as it's tools that like help teach us like what a lot of those things do. But like gunned in my head to ask to like play on like a piece of paper and like run a character sheet, no concept on how to do that. Like I was like, oh, here's a flaw in my armor or something I should work on.
It is both boon and bane, right? Because like I'm at the point where like I don't even want to use like third-party supplements and stuff that aren't on D&D Beyond, just because it's so easy to pull things up from there and use stuff from there. So it's really spoiled me, and also like making characters are like so freaking fast over there compared to what it used to be. I mean, we were making characters for a game, and some of the players were making them in Roll20, and they were like all custom races. And so one of the players was like walking my son through on how to, make the character. And in the time it took me to enter the custom races into D&D Beyond, like they hadn't even finished making the one character. And I was like, here, you can just go over in D&D Beyond and make it here. And then it's like 3 minutes later, he's got a character. So it is very spoiling.
It is. I think it's also probably led to like the boom of the hobby. I think D&D Beyond has been such a huge like piece or proponent of like D&D becoming bigger, is because it's a lot easier to make a character. I my first playing experience was like back in college, in the long ago of like 2000 and like 10. And we I was my first game was Pathfinder, and I remember just being completely like exasperated with the how long the process was for making a character in Pathfinder. It's because like it was like that it was the whole we were at somebody's house for like 5 hours, and that was the whole session was just like making characters, and asking a lot of questions.
So like we played a lot of third edition. And it's like, I remember a new player showing up to the table and you'd be like, here's a stack of books, go make your character. And in 2 hours, you too can play and have fun with us. So it's like, I don't miss that at all. Like, I am all for just getting in there and having people play and have fun as soon as possible.
Yeah. What I even do now, like prior to the session zero, of like I do one-on-one conversations with all my players, like when we're making new characters. So like, what is it you're wanting to do? How can I help you expedite the mechanical piece of this, so you can work on like all the other pieces that you want attached to it. So session zero can be explicitly us having conversations around, you know, the lines and the veils and boundaries and expectations and all those other things.
Yeah. So yeah, with session zero, we do that, and usually it's like we also try to build like narrative bridges between the characters, and because session zero has a stigma of being like this waste of time, and like of instead of playing, you know, I think especially for like busy adults, sometimes they struggle with this a little bit. But I've seen so many games fall apart. One, because you didn't do a session zero, and two, like if your session zero is boring, I just don't think you're doing it right. Like it should be fun.
Yeah, you can definitely make it fun. I just got finished doing one yesterday because I'm starting a new I just ended like 3 campaigns, and in classic DM fashion, like, well, it's time to start picking up another 3 campaigns. And it started one, and like session zero was so much fun. You know, you can be jokey, you can, because you're me, like for me at least, it's a bunch of people who I hadn't played with before, so it's like let's get to know each other. And I take all the like of my facilitation skills and have those conversations. So we do something called Campfire in game at the beginning, and so session zero opens with like their characters like sitting around a campfire, and you're allowed to ask the person to the left of you a question, which is kind of stolen from some other systems, but you know, you take all the good stuff from everything else in classic fashion, bring them over into D&D to like make the game a lot more fun, to make the game a lot more fun and to flow better, because D&D doesn't do a good job of like implementing stuff around the social piece of like D&D. A lot
No.
of stuff great for combats and pieces for exploration, but the social pillar, I don't think they do a good job of. But other systems do, things like Thirsty Swords Lesbians. I think Powered by the Apocalypse does a good job of that with like the questions that are built into the playbook. And so that's basically all Campfire is. It's just taking those questions and like here's a list of questions I have made. Ask the player to the left of you that question, and then that's how they build their narrative bridge or like a shared history. I'd never do the you all meet in a tavern for the first time. You know, I know a lot of people really like that, but I like people to know each other prior, because it always feels like when you do this is your first time meeting at a tavern, that you spend the first 5 sessions, you know, just being like, I don't trust you. And just,
Yeah.
you know, just a lot of that. It's like, let's get the angst out of the way, and let's, you know, actually like act like we're working professionals. Like if you're going to do that, let's like act like adults do, you know, when they have to do a job together. You know, there's none of that piece. Like let's just, you know, let's do the job. We don't have to be friends, but let's just do the job and like be professional about it.
I spent years as a dungeon master or game master trying to figure out how to get the players together like all the time and in game. And then like we started doing Nerdarchy, and I listened to a video from another GM. He'd been playing the game for like a year, and he was like, I don't get my players together. I make them do it. I'm like, what? Like it was such an epiphany. I'm like, what have I been doing all these years? And you know, and that like for us, that's part of session zero now. It's like, well, how do you guys know each other? Because never again will I try and get the characters together in game. You know, like I may help them if they want help with the narrative, but you know, I'm not going to do it in game. I'm not going to make players wait for their turn in order to get introduced anymore. It's just like everyone is just going to know each other and they're going to figure it out. And it takes, I mean, as the GM, you got so many other things to worry about. And I also find it just binds the characters together better and makes everything run so much smoother.
Yeah, I love that. I think that I've sort of learned, and one of the things I love about like all of us being like content creators is that we all get to share all of our little sneaky, lazy tips. We all have
Yeah.
things that we're able to share. I had the joy of like talking to somebody who like also does like facilitation like around D&D and like keeping 9-year-olds attention for 3 hours. I was like, how do you do that? And especially when we first started at the program, and one of the things they say is like when you have players come to your table, have them put something in the world. Like have them be like, this thing exists in the world, have them have control of, because they make it that they have like a little taste of what it is to be a DM. And that's the thing that we implement in the program is like all the kids play in the same world. So when the world was made for this game, I had all the kids that have gone through the program like, write me down the coolest thing you can think of. And they wrote it down, those things, and those and every time they come to the program, they're required to, like, when we tell a new story, we're adding new pages to the story. So you get to add a new page. What's something that exists in the world? And they bring that thing into the world. And then it's my job as DM to like make that thing exist properly. So I have Minecraft Redstone. There's a prison with demons in it. There's nice dragons, bad dragons. There's, 50-foot robots, all these things that, kids have come up with through going through the program. And what it makes them do is they want to go see that thing in the world. So when they come into the world, they're like, I want to see the thing I told you that it's like when you draw a picture for somebody, like it could look like the shittiest picture ever, but you're just excited because it's you. Like we're all selfish in that way.
Yeah.
And so it's just really great to like, when you do that, to like, they'll be invested in like it happens to adults too, right? Where like, when you like, tell me the coolest thing you can think of, and they'll tell you, and like, okay, that now exists in the world. I'm like, well, where is it? Well, you got to go find it. And they go out there and they try to find the thing. And when the thing does come up, the amount of excitement that's on somebody's face of like, you've taken my idea and you've turned it into an even cooler thing, I think is a really great way of like keeping people invested.
Yeah, like so many times I hear GMs and DMs complain about lack of player buying, and then and they'll go on to tell me about my game, my world, my campaign, my plot hooks. I'm like, dude, every sentence you said started with my. Maybe you should make it about them, and then you'll get them to care about your stuff, right? And like that's the big secret, and that's like basically what you just said. It's like I let them put stuff in the world, and then they want to go see it. So it's kind of a no-brainer. So sometimes as GMs, we got to get our heads out of our butts and take a step back.
Yeah, I seem like a really I'm curious about like if maybe you have an experience like this as well, because you'd mentioned kind of having why am I not doing that thing of I've seen a TikTok where there's a person who runs like a bunch of like programs for like kids, and the kids are the DMs, and he was looking over the shoulder of one of the kids, and they didn't have anything written down for the monsters they were doing. And he asked the kid afterwards, like, hey, well, so how are you tracking the monsters? And he said, I just let them fight it till it's not fun anymore. And then the monster dies. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Write down a couple of abilities and then just let them fight it until it's not fun anymore.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's definitely so we are definitely huge fans of the illusion of choice, right? And nothing exists in RPGs until it does. So there are definitely hardcore gamers that will fight you on this to the end of time, and it's cheating and it's wrong fun and all these things. But at the end of the day, if you're doing that to screw over your players and win D&D, then you're probably right. But if you're doing it because you're trying to create a narrative for them, you're trying to give them the vehicle to help tell the stories they want to tell with their characters, there's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion. Like I did a Eberron adventure where they're on the lightning rail and they go into one of the cars, and all the passengers are slumped over in their seats and they're dead. And then, enter vampire. They all get up as zombies and begin fighting. they defeat the vampire, and I'm like, I am not having them slog through all these zombies. The vampire is gone, so are the zombies. They all just fall to the ground lifeless. Do it until it's not fun anymore is great advice.
Yeah, I love that, and also just like you were saying, like I think it also depends on like what your relationship is. Like because I've had the joy of like getting to play at like a bunch of different tables, and I do know the different DMs hold different philosophies. I definitely am like I'm in, from my perspective, I think your the job as like a DM is to like facilitate fun. I'm always rooting for my players to succeed. If they do, like, it's, you don't have to make obstacles for them. A lot of times they'll do it themselves. Like, you give them enough length of rope and they'll hang themselves. You don't need to do anything. A lot of times they'll cause their own trouble. You don't have to necessarily, but I have played with people who like enjoy that, like, I don't want to call it antagonistic, but adversarial relationship between like a player and a DM, like who's more clever, almost like a game of chess. Not how I would prefer to have fun, but I can definitely see the appeal. I'm curious, like, for what is your relationship with like DMing and like your players?
So it is definitely morphed and changed over the years. When I first started gaming, there was definitely a more adversarial role between GM and players, and but like the better GMs had this unspoken code of honor that they followed, right? And they tended to be the better GMs. The worst GMs was it's me versus you, which is completely unfair in an RPG because as the GM you hold all the power, and you can do whatever you want pretty much. But and so like I came up through the game kind of like that, where it's like I was always trying to challenge the players in what would be a quote unquote fair way, fair manner. And it was a little bit less about telling stories as we progressed through the game. And my experience as a GM, it became more and more about telling stories. And then, to the point of like, openly becoming the adversary of the players while secretly rooting for them the whole time. And now it's like, it's my job to facilitate them trying to tell whatever story they want to tell, right? And I am all the unexpected and unpredictable and random things that just happen in the world that they interact with, I guess that's kind of where I stand now. When like you had said, like the players will create obstacles for themselves. When I ran my campaign at D&D in the Castle, the two most memorable moments for me were player driven, and they weren't things that I had planned. And one of them it was literally a spiraling ramp that went downward, and it wasn't even like super challenging. I was just like, hey, like you're gonna have to take some extra steps or some precautions because it's getting kind of steep, so that you don't slip and fall. And they said, okay, hold my beer. I want to surf down on my shield. And they all decided this would be the best way to get to the bottom. The most damage that was done to them throughout that whole campaign, I think, was just from them deciding to surf down, because at every turn I just made them make checks or whatever. And depending on how they did on their checks, kind of because I had to now come up with the rule for shield surfing down this spiral. So that was one of the crazy things. And another one was this character was a gem cutter, and they came across this like psychic machine built with crystal skulls. And that player was like, I need to get some of these and take them with me. And like they did it once successfully, and then they decided to keep like pushing their luck. And also in the meantime, like there's this like, it's also connected to what looks like almost a giant aquarium with something like ominous swimming around in it. And like they decided to play with it anyway, of course, and poke it. So that character ended up getting dominated, mind controlled, and turning on the rest of the party at the final confrontation at the end of the adventure.
Yeah, like it writes itself.
Yes.
It writes itself. Or like you don't really, as a DM, you really do not have to do a lot of things. I think most of my prep just goes into understanding the world that I've created, but most of the times, like it's like they make their own mischief. They and in attempts to do cool things, people will go to any extreme or links to grab the shiny thing to impress their favorite NPC. Whatever it is, they'll do it. You don't have to do a lot. You don't have to do damage to them. They'll do it to themselves. At least in my experience, both with like kids and like adults. More so the adults than the kids. Kids are a lot more cautious than some adults are in games in terms of some of the wild stuff they'll try.
Kids want to like steal stuff and push boundaries and get pets is what I've found.
The pet thing's more of an adult thing. I have that problem where like I intentionally will not introduce a bunch of animals into like if we go into the woods, do I see any animals? There are no animals in the woods. There's no animals in the woods. Not a single animal in the wood. Because they'll collect them, and then like it's so hard because then you have to like in the back of your head remember like they have a menagerie of animals with them as they're like free falling from like an airship or something. I'm not gonna do the math. Let's just say that animals never can be hurt. But also you can't use them mechanically. Like they just exist for the aesthetic.
That is fair. I mean, my general rule is if you use it in combat, it becomes a viable target. Ted has what he calls his kids game, and they like have a whole traveling menagerie as well. I'm like, Ted, one fireball, you can clear that all out.
It's if it's not animals, then it's NPCs.
Yeah.
They always want to take some hapless shopkeeper into a dungeon who's never left their hometown at all, and they're like, well, we're gonna take them on adventures, and like this feels irresponsible. Or it's always some goblin child is being dragged into an adventure. It's a mess.
Fantasy Diapers would definitely been called on this one.
It's like, whose child is? Who lets their child go like on an adventure with a bunch of random, bloodthirsty mercenaries? But okay, yeah, sure.
I did have one player that would always try and be empathetic towards the monsters and try and like reform them, and I would let it work sometimes, just enough because like if you let it work sometimes, it's so much more fun when you have them betray them later. And so like sometimes it does actually work, but occasionally it's not. And like that player knows it, right? Like they go in, eyes wide open, like expecting to have the thing try and eat their face eventually, but it doesn't stop them. So, as a DM, I just like to encourage it.
I always do every NPC or monster or something has like a thing that they want. And they do whatever that thing is that they think is going to get them to get it. So if you can figure out what the thing is that they want and you can give it to them or help decide it, you can totally talk them out of it. Like if wolves just don't randomly attack people in the woods in real life. You have to do something to antagonize them, or you're encroaching on something of theirs. And I use that same logic with a lot of monsters like goblins or orcs or any of those all can be reasoned with if you have gold, or if you have access to a thing that they want, or you speak their language and you can communicate. That can always be navigated. Things like beasts and stuff, like food's usually the motivator. Or you're in their territory. If you can navigate that, I let my players do it. But if you're just like, no, fuck it, I'm gonna fight this monster, fight that monster. I'm not gonna stand in the way of that. But I always try to, like, in every situation, be like, there's an alternative, there's a non-violent means of solving this problem, just to like try to sway the murder hobo-esqueness that kind of pops up from time to time of like, because people always go for like the short, the most efficient route to solve a problem, and sometimes like that is just like murder, death, kill. So like always, especially like with the kids, like trying to like teach them like there's other ways to solve the problem. So like just intrinsically try to like put that in the world. I
had this beholder, Stanley, that was introduced, and he was imprisoned in this worded area that he just couldn't leave, and required like psionic energy and arcane energy combined to free them from this prison, and they weren't ever supposed to really get out. It would have been like a huge undertaking. And so, but the players like ran into them, and they were kind of personable just because they'd been alone for so long, and they just wanted some kind of company. So they would go back, and they decided they were going to free Stanley at some point, and they did because one of the cleric rolled divine intervention, and I was like, oh, well, that's different. And that was definitely a case where they freed Stanley, brought them back to one of the players. She brought Stanley and the rest of the party back to her wife's pirate ship, and then Stanley is being Stanley, a malevolent entity, a beholder, is like, I like this idea, and I like all of you. You're all now my crew, and we're going to pirate together, which did not go over well. But but I only would do that with like truly malevolent creatures. Like some things are beyond reason, but most things are not. So I do like if you could come up with non-violent solutions or alternate means of getting accomplishing goals. Although that being said, if they agreed to be his crew, there wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah.
Which, and also with players, you just never know that there's a group of players out there that would have made a different decision.
Yeah, exactly. It's the things people choose and end up doing. I don't know. I never cease to be impressed with the creative problem solving that players come up with for things.
There was one game that I ran. It was a one shot, but the big bad was like a cult to Baphomet, and the players like defeated the cult, did all the things, and then at the end decided they were going to be the ones to summon Baphomet, and did. And like we ended that with them bringing a demon lord into the world, and agreeing to serve him. So like had we done another session, the next session would have been them as the champions of Baphomet. So you just never know what your players are going to do. How many you said you're running 3 games currently?
Don't judge me. I'm currently interacting in like 7 games a week. I'm running 4. I'm playing in 3. Quarantine is long, and I have no other hobbies.
Well, you make me feel less bad because I really don't have any other hobbies either. I just don't have the time. It's like there's so many other things I would like to, but between working, Nerdarchy full time, being into RPGs, and having a family, that seems to be enough.
Yeah, I do a lot of like long shots. I think is like to satisfy like my itch. I have like one long term campaign, and then the rest are just like these little short things that I'm running. And I'm also just gotten really into like collecting indie games. So like my local game store is definitely getting more and more money out of me every day from like buying buying a bunch of like games that I've never played. So like I usually just do it based on the art. Like, does the art look cool? Yeah, let's try to play this. Let me convince 3 people who have like free time on a Wednesday to try out this new system, and then we'll run like a long shot that lasts like 2 or 3 months, and then like move on. And so in any given time, up to 7 games, no more than 7 games.
Well, it's because you have a limit there, a hard limit of 7 games.
Yeah. Some of them get played on the same day. I and also like that's not including like the games that I run for like that's including the games I run for kids. Right now I'm running 2 for kids, but I'm also in charge of the program. We have volunteer DMs that like teach kids. So like at any given time we have anywhere between 10 and 15 tables going at one time. And I have to do check-ins and stuff for that, and we do all these extra things for the kids to like make the games feel more lived in. We're teaching them how to make paper scrolls, so like with computer paper and spilling coffee over it and then drying it out and then rolling it up to make like scrolls.
That's funny. You get paid to ruin computer paper.
Yeah, I mean that's the dream. When I graduated college, I was like, what they were like, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I want to ruin computer paper with coffee, and do arts and crafts with kids. And they're like, well, that's what this anthropology degree is going to get you.
Perfect score. So how do you work that education into your games as a GM or even a player? How does that influence you?
um but it always comes like all my games come from a space of education a lot, like even like my private home, my private home games of like always want to explore a theme or explore culture. Because I'm an anthropologist by like my degree, I intrinsically am always like, oh, I want to do lots of heavy research into like this culture and be because it's just that person like wanting to be responsible, like I'm taking things from different cultures, or where did this thing come from, and is it being represented, in a good ethical way. And then doing the research behind that and wanting to explore those things with kids. The things that I like to teach are things that I think are good, like social skills. I think that we don't, because of like the nature of like us being in quarantine and people not getting chances to like build those social skills, doing things like boundaries, asking for consent, doing collaborative storytelling, or learning how to collaborate with other people to build stories. And those things, I think, if you, one, modeling them, and two, making them into a game, make them insanely easy to teach. And I think that games like D&D facilitate being able to have those things in the world.
Do you use the same campaign world all the time, or do you create different ones for different games?
For the kids, it's the same campaign world. I've recently started letting adults play in that world, because like I talk about it on my lives on
Yeah.
TikTok, and I also do videos on it. And like, I would love to play in that. And so like a lot of my like short-term campaigns have been in these kids like made up world
How,
that they've made.
how do the kids feel about you letting adults muck around in their world?
Oh, they're real strict. They are real like they're real strict about, you make sure they understand this. I
Mhm.
have this one young man named Robert who's been in the program for a while, and he is just he's one of us, like definitively
Mhm.
one of us. Of just like, he's built out like entire lore. He has a notebook full of just like sketches and drawings. So like he made this world called Arcala, that's like this demon prison that's like his baby. And he makes sure that I understand that when because I ask, I always ask the kids like, hey, are you okay with me sharing? Because that's part of the consent piece. It's like, oh, this is
Yeah.
your creative property. Is it okay if I share this with other people? And Robert, like, very seriously, in the way that like 12-year-old boys are, was like, well, as long as they understand the rules of how art color work, and just like, giving them that space, like be excited and share that with me. Because I also think, especially like kids that come to the program like that, like they don't get a lot of spaces to be able to like be excited in that way and be able to share with like not just an adult, but like their peers of like, this is this thing I'm really excited about, but like nobody seems to care about that, because a lot of times people kind of shut off kids, like, you've been talking to me for an hour and a half about this thing, I don't care. But like, I'm paid to, and also I genuinely care, because like for me,
Yeah.
as part of the program is like, hey, this is this thing you created, I want to hear more about it, tell me about it. And like, I respect the kids, when they make things in the world, like this was what they wanted. And like, I think showing that care and respect and that interest like drives them to want to do more creative things. Robert's about to run his first table, which is really exciting. And he's been, every time he sees me, he's like, mixed Tali, can you this and tell me how this thing works? How do you build this? What do you think? Like that they're excited about that, and that they put the care and love and energy that like I put into world building, is really exciting. So all the things that exist in the world. One, I have all the kids that made those things permission to share it. And two, like they are all very strict about like, you tell them they can't change a single thing. This
Yeah.
is my thing, and this is how it's supposed to exist in the world.
Well, it's good to know that you're minting new GMs, that they're very, very serious about their worlds, but unfortunately, they don't know how players work yet, because that's all players do is mess up your stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited for Robert to be on the other, because he's definitely my troublemaker. He's definitely my like, this is what I would do, and this is how I will do it. And I'm very lenient as a DM. I'm like, yeah, sure. If you can explain it to me and it makes sense, I don't see why I wouldn't let that thing happen. And sometimes it's a
Yeah.
little off the wall. So I'm super excited for him to come and tell me like they ruined my world. And I'm like, that happens, buddy. It's not your world anymore. The
They
moment you
exploded
let
my
other
demon prison. There's no demons
yep,
in the prison anymore.
yep. So like every time I see him, he's always like, I need an update. Have they gotten to the prison yet? And I'm like, unfortunately, Robert, they haven't, but they're about to. He's like, well, make sure that you do this thing and this thing. I'm like, I will make sure that thing and that thing gets done.
How old is Robert?
Robert is 11 going on 12.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. It is. It is always exciting to see like new players coming into the hobby, kids coming in the hobby, but even more so to see someone that young, flipping to the other side of the screen and running their own games. So is Robert going to be running for all like tweens?
Robert's going to be running for some adults.
Oh,
He's going
nice.
to be running for like a mix of adults and kids. It's going to be running for his father. So like a big part of what we're doing is like I'm not teaching like my secret plan is to make more DMs in the world. That's the real secret agenda of my program is I want more DMs in the world. But I also want like kids to like be able to do creative writing. It's because a lot of these are Black and brown kids from like areas that like they don't have access to, that they wouldn't be able to get access to those books. They go through the program, they have to complete a campaign, and if they complete a campaign, I have a deal with the game store of like they can pick any book or game in the store, and that's theirs now. Right, we pay for them, because we want to support our local game stores. By the way, you should support your local game stores, buy local if you can. But the kids, so that they get to choose, like how do they like? If some of them want to play D&D, some of them get into Quest. I have quite a few that do Powered by the Apocalypse. And they pick where they want to start their journey, because like that's what we're wanting. We're wanting them to like, and then they take it to their families. So like the game that Robert's DMing, his dad's in it. His uncle's in it, 2 kids from the program is in it, and they get together on Wednesdays at the game store and they play together, and he's teaching his dad how to get into it. And those are the best teachers, Robert seems to be doing a good job. I show up for the first couple sessions, just like hang out and like kind of be like his assistant coach, or just like I kind of sit there and he's like, am I doing this right? I'm like, yeah, no, you're doing fine. And then we have like a little conversation afterwards. Like, so how did that feel? Like, what did you struggle with? What was hard? What was easy? Here's what I would do. And I'll send you, here's some tools to be able to do that. And they each have their own little like official DM binder that they all have.
Well, when we get done here, like if you give me an address, I'll send out like 5 hardback books of our out of the box encounters to you.
Oh, awesome.
To you for you to use in the program, and I'll get you a PDF that you can use however you want. Because we definitely love the fact that you're minting new DMs and young DMs as well, and getting more people into the hobby. It's greatly appreciated. I mean, like that's part of our core mission and always has been, just to expand the hobby, and also to trick our wives into thinking we're working when we're actually playing D&D. But yeah, like why can't we do both?
Yeah, I definitely did it to my husband. He's like, what are you? He's like, why are we going to the game store? I'm like, well, I need more dice for work.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a work expense. We're going for work. We got to stop by the office. This isn't the office. This is the game store. Well, this is also technically my office. Just like
it's the adjoining office to my office. So what if it's on the other side of town?
Yeah, it was like, hey, I was just out and I just happened to be in that side of town. Oh, did you happen to be on that side? It's just out on that side of town. It just happened to stop by. I stopped and I picked up a couple of things I needed.
So, have you reached out to like D&D Beyond and places like that for partnerships?
Yeah. No, I've teamed up with Wizards of the Coast. I live in Washington, and they're headquartered up here. And we've definitely met a couple times in different scenarios. Also with like a couple of local games. There's like a Heart of the Deer Corn, which is located down in Olympia. I've partnered with them around stuff. I get a lot of free digital dice. I have a relationship with them. Whenever we do stuff, I get a lot of free digital dice. I have a lot of access to books and stuff. They gave me like because I buy all the D&D Beyond books, and a lot of the kids use I enable my thing, and they're able to use that. And and give them lots of physical copies of books and what have you. So like we have a like off and on relationship, but I lean more into like a lot of my local relationships, specifically
Okay.
with like my local game store, because of like how grants work. Because like it is a program that is like sponsored through like grants to a nonprofit. So there's rules and things you have to follow, and like how you spend the money and where that money goes. And one of the things was like, oh, it's all going to be local. So like a lot of that money goes to that specific game store. But I do get things like digital dice and stuff, like lots of supplemental stuff from like other third party people.
I know, because like I know like D&D Beyond makes it a lot more accessible for ease of use, and also like I remember like kind of like a couple of years ago, like I got into a Twitter fight with like another personality and a couple different people, because like early on D&D Beyond there was a lot of pushback, like I don't want to buy the books again, like, and I've always been like, don't buy them then, like, but the truth of the matter is they're angry because they really do want it, but they can't get it for free, right?
Yeah.
And and like we were going back and forth for a while, and then someone chimed in and they're like, hey, like I'm visually impaired, and please don't do something to make this go away. This is one of the few things that actually works really well for readers, so that we can access these products. And I was like, wow, well, mic drop. I'll leave on that note, because you guys are just proving yourselves to be a-holes anyway. But no, and then no, they actually did like do a 180 and apologized. And sometimes we just have trouble seeing things from a different perspective. But if one's offered, then we can come around. But like, and it was also a weird argument to me anyway. It's because like the same people had bought the product several different times on different platforms, but this is the one that should be free for whatever reason.
Yeah, in my mind, it's like the argument for like dice. Like, yeah, you can technically just buy one set of dice.
Yeah,
you can get by with one set of dice. But I mean, me and you, Dave, both know you need more dice.
Yeah, like you're never gonna have like enough dice, and then
Yeah, you're always gonna need more. Like, do they functionally all do the same thing? Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They functionally all do the same thing. But you know what? It's the for me. It's like it's needed. Like I don't mind paying for the books, and I give free access within like my program for people to use the books, and I pay the subscription. And I've told D&D Beyond, like, if you all up the price, I'll pay whatever that is, because like it's a great accessibility tool.
Yeah.
In terms of like lots of kids can't afford the books, lots and want to be able to play and look at it, and they can look at this from their phone. They don't have to worry about losing the book. It's a great like digital tool to be able to like play the game. A lot of them bring their phones, and there's that new app that D&D Beyond has, where they can run their character sheets from like their phone, because every kid's got a phone. And it's just really accessible and really easy. And has made like teaching it a lot easier.
And it's great for
like,
that player that always loses their character sheet.
Yeah, it's great for that. And the only bad thing is like now it's a lot of like, Tali, can you look at my character sheet? No, I don't want to. It's also great for like I get into the habit of like when they're like I cast blah blah blah. I was like, well, can you tell everybody what that spell does? And then like having them read it, or they can just click on it and it immediately does it, instead of like back in the day. I know when I played Pathfinder, and like my DM would ask me, I was like, let me get the book and like find what page it's on, and then read it, because I don't care who you are. Nobody does a good job of like writing down spells. I'm sure there's somebody out there, but most of the time in my life experience, like nobody does a good job of writing down what their spells do.
I find hover cards life changing. So it's like my favorite thing, the hover cards and the tooltips. How many of the kids from the programs have found you on TikTok?
Oh, there's a fair amount of them that have found me on TikTok. It's why I don't talk about any of the campaigns on there. Yeah. Because they're all looking for, like, early on, I was definitely like talking about like things are going on in the campaigns or things I had planned to do, but then they found me, and I could tell because like I could go to the table, and then they'd be way too prepared for whatever the encounter was that I had planned, and I'm like, I see what's happened. Um, so a fair amount of them do. A lot of them like a lot of my content, or they don't understand, or it's stuff they've heard from me. I get not made fun of, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely mimicked for like my way of talking to the kids by the kids.
You've become a
I,
meme.
yeah, I'm a meme. I'm just of like, okay, like they make fun of me like when they talk to one, and it's like, okay, so I'm gonna ask for consent because I do a lot of like, hey, are you okay with me doing this? Like, do I have your permission to do this thing? Because like
Yeah.
I want to like normalize and teach that. And so like what they'll do is they'll be like, hey, Miss Tali, are you okay with me grabbing these dice? And I'm like, yes. Yes, Robert, I'm okay with you grabbing your own dice. Don't it's like lots of so just a lot of that. I'm a lot nicer in real life than I am on TikTok. Definitely play a bit of a character
Mm.
on TikTok. So it's really surprising for them sometimes to see me just like being like I don't think I'm being mean. It's definitely good natured ribbing with other D&D content creators, but I'm definitely mean to a handful of them in a good natured way. And so a lot of them like, you need to be nicer to blah blah blah. I'm like, listen. Listen, I have to be nice all day. TikTok's the only place I get to like be like
This is
unreasonably
where I
mean.
unwind and be mean to other people.
Yeah.
So we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Um, one, I just like this is a really great opportunity for me to like meet you, Dave. I have been as we talked about before, I've been a long time follower of your content. I like a lot of the things you all put out into the world. The out of box encounters, like when XP3 was doing their like whole thing with it, I sponsored that. I kickstarted a lot of the things that you all put out into the world because I think you all make great products. And just like thank you for putting the things that you put out into the world.
Well, thank you for putting the things into the world that you do. I really appreciate it. And to be honest, we've got plenty of old white guys out here talking about D&D, so we use switch it up a little bit, and get some different voices out there. And also, I love the fact that through creators like yourself, and also through what you do is your job, we get to penetrate communities that are maybe a little bit harder to reach for us to expand the hobby even further and get even more voices into the conversation. As always, folks, links are in the description. Go follow Tali across the interwebs. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Later, guys.